Hey, y'all. Welcome back to Format Podcast. On today's episode, we have on Dr. Adrian Chavez, who's a Ph.D. in nutrition. He's a full-time nutritionist for folks, and man, was this interesting. We dove into seed oils and keto diet and carnivore diet and all these common misconceptions that people have and all this clickbait stuff in the nutrition space. We just cut through it all, and man, was he full of knowledge and information. This is probably the most information-dense episode we've had yet. Didn't think it was going to be that way and ended up just being so, but I learned so much about nutrition, my health, things to do. So if you have any interest in any of those categories, this is absolutely the episode to you. And big shout out to our sponsor, Rambler Sparkling Water. Thanks. So Adrian, thank you for coming on. We appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
So what's your backstory? I mean, how did you end up where you are today? Well, I guess for people who don't know, like what would you say you're doing as of today?
So I run a business around nutrition and health promotion. So I have a PhD. I got a PhD in nutrition and health promotion. I got a bachelor's and master's degree in exercise science first. And I was just interested overall in health and wellness. I met people who were older than me, 60, 70 years old, who were like, just being able to move around and in great health. And to me, that inspired me at a very young age, like 19, 20 years old. I was like, that's what I want. So at that time I was in college. I was like engineering major or something like that. I switched my major to exercise science, was really focused on that. And then realized the importance of nutrition. So you can exercise quite a bit and do pretty well, especially when you're younger. But at that point I was like, okay, nutrition matters. I need to be focused on this as well. And not only for myself, but, at that point I was looking at as a career, like exercising at that point I wanted to train like athletes. And then from a health standpoint, so I took a public health class and I was like, oh, wow, all of this same information that I'm learning applies to people who have type 2 diabetes. And if they exercise and do the things that I'm learning how to do for athletes, I can actually help people reverse their chronic health conditions. So at that point, I completely changed my trajectory, switched my degree to nutrition and health promotion, got a PhD, went to a lot of school for it. Wow. Worked at a university for a while, but then I met a lot of people who ran podcasts and other types of communication methods online where they were talking about nutrition. They were reaching millions of people, and I'm in here just reaching a few dozen people in a university, and these people are reaching a lot more people and seem to be, from my perspective, they're having a larger impact on the world in the field that I felt like I was probably more qualified to be speaking in than they were, because I met some of these people. I was living in California, and a lot of the people in the health and wellness space who have popular podcasts, who have popular platforms, their information is just not accurate. You get popular by saying sensational things, by claiming you have some type of special method. And so at that point, that was 6 or 7 years ago, about 7 years ago, I decided I'm going to start creating a little bit of content online. I was going to make a plan to leave my job, leave academia, and start building a business around health and wellness, around trying to do this from a more science-based perspective and providing accurate information, which is difficult, much more difficult than I expected. Because as I got into this space, I realized you sign up for marketing courses and you reach out to mentors and things of people who are successful, and you realize that a lot of it is centered around just selling things to people that they may not need and not actually helping them to improve their health. Because a lot of the things that people need to do, you can't just consistently make money off it. People need to eat more fruits and vegetables. So telling them to do that isn't as profitable as selling people a greens powder. And so this space, in my opinion, I've gone on a trajectory that I didn't expect. I was planning on working in a university, and now I'm more in the health and wellness influencer space. But it's been an interesting journey from there. But that's what I do, is try to promote health and wellness from a more science-based perspective, the things that we know actually help, and not all of the fringe things that tend to be really popular right now.
That's interesting. That's what a great mission. Are you enjoying it so far? Are you having fun with it?
Oh, I love what I do. I mean, this is, as you heard from the beginning, this is what I started focusing on with my lifestyle. And I started exercising, changed my diet, felt amazing. I mean, I'm 37 years old. I'm almost as athletic as I was as a star athlete in high school. Like a lot of, I can't even believe the level of wellness that I'm able to maintain just by like consistently following these same habits my whole life. And hasn't been, I'm not doing these crazy diets or detoxes. This morning I go lift weights for 30 minutes and go for a short walk, and eat a healthy meal 3 times a day. It's not anything that's extremely difficult for the average person to do. It's just our culture is more, our culture doesn't promote healthy habits. And then when you try to get into learning about these things, you're just being marketed to left and right, unfortunately. So I love what I do. I didn't expect it to be as challenging when I went to go leave my job from academia, because I expected that because I knew what I was talking about and was an expert in this field, that would give me credibility. But I realized that doesn't work that way in today's society, unfortunately. And marketing is the way that you have to learn how to market to people in a way that is sensational but not misleading, which is a lot more difficult.
Yeah, I feel like it's hard to kind of get a lot of views on something if it's just like, no one wants to hear eat your vegetables. They want to say, hey, you can drink this powder, and so I think that's such a steep hill to climb for people to understand. And I feel like in most of these situations, the answer is pretty simple on what you should do. And it's all this fluff that kind of gets around it. Something I'm curious about is I feel like in a lot of spaces, and especially health, which my knowledge is very limited, I feel like science or scientists can contradict each all the time. And like one guy's saying this and one guy's saying that, and they're both air quotes experts. And for someone on the outside, it's so hard to understand like who's right in this dynamic. They both sound right. They both are very smart. They both have more degrees than I do. I mean, how do you decipher between experts when they're both disagreeing on something? Like, how do you look at situations like that? That
is a really challenging one. And what the problem with that is a lot of that is sensationalism. So if you actually go to a university, and the other problem is that a lot of the actual scientists are not communicating on social media. These people are running grants, they're running studies, they're not doing any type of communication to the general public. They're just focusing on their scientific work. And a lot of them don't communicate well to the general public. Like even if they did, they wouldn't be able to communicate like their research very well. So I think a lot of what scientists disagreeing, a lot of the public's perception of that is mainly based on headlines that media puts out oftentimes. So like, for example, there was a Consumer Reports article that looked at dark chocolate showing that there was like slightly high levels of some metals in some type of dark chocolates. Even those levels were well below what would be considered any level of risk. But then you see all these headlines saying, scientists say dark chocolate is healthy, but new report shows that may not be the case. And you see these things, and that's unfortunately the general public is getting the far ends of the spectrum in terms of science and not the actual scientific discussion, which it just requires more nuance for everything. Like, for example, with the dark chocolate. So you can make a case on both ends now. You can say you should stay away from dark chocolate because there are heavy metals in there. And then on the other side, you can say you should eat dark chocolate because there's a lot of flavonoids, and there's studies to show that it can reduce risk of cardiovascular disease. And so that's scientists disagree, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. But the reality is there's just more nuance to the discussion that's not being had on social media or on most popular podcasts, because a lot of these people don't understand the nuance. It's just complicated. Like, this topic is quite complicated. Like just this topic that I just mentioned, the dark chocolate. Like, you have to read quite a bit to understand that. You have to understand the different, the heavy metal levels in dark chocolate. You have to understand the risk associated with those heavy metal levels. You have to understand that, there's certain compounds in dark chocolate that can be beneficial. And then, do we have any research showing that people who eat these foods, do they have positive or negative health effects? So I did mention earlier that this is very simple, like the lifestyle things that we need to be doing are simple. It can also get really complicated. Yeah. And what's happening a lot of times is people are overcomplicating things on social media in order to create these polarizations instead of focusing on the things that actually matter. Like someone can talk about that dark chocolate and scare people, and that's more viral, of saying, dark chocolate has heavy metals. I will get tons of views on that, as opposed to saying, hey, dark chocolate has heavy metals, but there's these other nuances that are involved. That's not going to be as sensational. That's not going to go as viral, unfortunately. And we're just living in an age where everyone's kind of basing opinions more on headlines rather than getting a little bit deeper into things. And it's just hard to get deeper into things because you have to find the people who know those things in that depth. And that, I mean, if you look at the popular nutrition podcast on Apple, on Spotify, I mean, I'm up there, but there is the good majority of them are people who don't have a background in nutrition. Like, it's just people who are like, there's a podcast on fasting, and it's like, there's really not any major benefits of fasting for long periods of time. You just eat less, and eating less is really good for some people because they're overeating on a regular basis. So going long periods of time without eating causes them to eat less. They lose weight. They feel better. Pretty much it. But there's a whole podcast talking about autophagy benefits of fasting and fasting for cancer and fasting. And it's all just made up. It's all just sensationalizing these little small mechanisms that are occurring. Because when you fast, so when we don't eat for a long period of time, our body will go into a different metabolic state than it normally is in. And so what these people are doing is they're taking some of the things that are happening in that metabolic state, and they're extrapolating that information to say, oh, because you're in this metabolic state and this is occurring, that means that fasting kills cancer cells, because some of the cancer cells that were, developing in this metabolic state may not grow during this short period of time. But you have to eat again. Like, it ignores the fact that you actually have to eat again, and it's just focusing in on these minutia and exaggerating it and sensationalizing it. And that's just what so much of nutrition is. And when you talk about scientists disagreeing, a lot of times it's a rogue person who, for whatever reason, a lot of times they're not nutrition experts. Like, you'll see, if you look at these people's background, either they're an MD or they have a biochemistry degree or a neuroscience degree or something that's like loosely related. That would be like me trying to talk about neuroscience. I don't know anything about neuroscience. I can definitely speak to it in a way that the average person would think that I knew what I was talking about, because I understand the human body well enough, and I can talk about dopamine and serotonin, and I can use those words that would make the average person who doesn't know neuroscience and doesn't know human physiology as well as I do believe that I knew what I was talking about. But that's unfortunately a lot of what's happening. Is it's not really science. Like, because a lot of my friends are PhDs and master's degree nutrition scientists, we don't disagree on much. Like, and when we do, we'll have a discussion and be like, hey, did you see this study? And it's like, oh yeah, I said this because, I knew that was the case, but it doesn't make sense to communicate it in that way on social media because, covering those nuances doesn't make sense. Like, the disagreements that happen amongst actual scientists and actual professionals in this field are very small. It's just that a lot of people are seeing, like, chiropractors, MDs, naturopaths, and all these other people who don't have training in this field. Like, they just saw the opportunity in many cases to go viral on social media, and it works. Like, it's a very effective method.
I feel like that happens so much, whether it's politics or almost any topic.
It's just in the social finances media. And health. It's like the things that people care about the most. Like, we care about our health, we care about our money, and there's going to be opportunists in those spaces that are going to take advantage of that and just tell you, frame it. So, like, with money, they're going to show themselves in the private jet and tell you that they have the 2-step solution to becoming a multimillionaire, and maybe they rented that jet. Same thing with same thing on the other side with, like, nutrition. A lot of these people, I mean, the vast majority of them are on performance enhancing drugs, and they're not talking about it. Like, in the male fitness space, like, most guys are taking performance enhancing drugs and then giving, like, exercise plans to people who aren't on PEDs, or they diet down for a photo shoot, and then they keep posting those pictures over and over again as if that's, like, the way that they normally look, and they don't. And then they're hired, like, they're coaching people to try to look a way that they can't even maintain. And it's damaging a lot of people's mental health because it's driving a lot of people to like, social media is driving a lot of people to reach for these like unattainable standards naturally in many cases, I think.
I want to put a bookend on the dark chocolate conversation. Yeah. Do you eat dark chocolate?
Oh, every day.
Okay. Yeah. So you were a proponent as even though there are potentially some heavy metals.
So there's heavy metals in everything. That's the thing is we have to understand, like this is where you can like completely exaggerate anything. We're breathing in heavy metals. We're breathing in like, toxic gases on a regular basis. We're being exposed to these things all the time. It's just what is the dose and how does that relate to the overall health impact of that food? And with food, at the end of the day, like we can look at these individual constituents, but at the end of the day, what we have to look at is what happens when people eat this food. Like when we feed people this, no matter what's in it, whatever constituents or how it's processed, what happens when people eat it? Does their health improve or does it get worse? And we have studies on all of almost every food with that type of data. And with dark chocolate, it's all positive. Blood pressure goes down, blood sugar regulation improves, long-term cardiovascular disease risk goes down. And it's largely, when foods are really darkly pigmented, usually they're very nutritious, like dark chocolate, blueberries, cherries, wine, grapes, those type of things where it'll like stain your hands or stain like a cloth really easily. Usually that's a sign that food is very nutritious, and dark chocolate just has a lot of micronutrients and antioxidants that far outweigh the slight risk of having some heavy metals in there.
I assume not all dark chocolates are the same.
Yes. And
so that with coffee, I've deep dived on coffee before. And I know that there's lots of stuff on mass-produced coffee being terrible and full of toxins. I feel like there's a lot of clickbait in this entire space to go right back to sales. Which is really frustrating because everything you just said about intermittent fasting or fasting, I thought that stuff was all true. I would have told someone that didn't know about it that, it's anti-aging, it's anti-cancer, it's great for you.
But can we get into the weeds on fast? Because that's one that, again, I've always thought
I used to fast a lot. I used to fast for days.
I did intermittent fasting for a long time. But I was trying to gain weight, lifting weights, and I couldn't. I stayed the same weight.
I lost a lot of my muscle mass. Yeah. Like you're basically putting your body into a state where it has to use internal energy stores for fuel, which that's a good thing if you're trying to lose weight. But if you're trying to gain weight, you're going to break down protein during that time if you're fasting for longer periods of time.
I work out a lot and I eat a lot, but my metabolism is very fast. It's very hard to gain weight. And fasting was just shooting myself in the foot. It was impossible.
Yeah. I feel like a few years ago in the whole fasting conversation kind of was like a fad there for a while. I feel like it still somewhat is, but I remember I came out and I was like, intermittent fasting. I'm like, I skip breakfast already every day. I'm already doing that. There we go. I'm a beacon of health.
So this is a funny thing because I would see that and I'm like, but we have data on people who skip breakfast and they have worse health outcomes like overall. So with that, like some of the early studies did look really promising. So I did a lot of fasting, like 2012, 2013, like before it actually became like a big trend. Mm-hmm. I mean, because I read the research. So I was like doing my Ph.D. and I saw some of these studies and I was like, oh, wow, like fasting seems to have all these positive health benefits. But in those studies, they're just having people fast. And so they're telling them, hey, only eat between these 8 hours or only eat every other day. Like they have different fasting protocols and they all have positive health benefits. But then they started doing studies where they would compare those individuals and they would have them stick to a certain calorie level. And then they compare people who weren't fasting who were eating the same calories, because that's what really tells you, is it fasting or is it just that you're eating less?
Were they monitoring what they were eating though?
Yeah. So all these, they're very controlled. When these studies are really expensive to run, they basically, so a lot of them, they'll feed people. Other ones, they just basically do a 3-day record every single time. And they're giving them, they have them work with the dietitian. They're like, this is what we want you to be eating. And then they monitor it. Like they do the best they can to try to measure, like to try to control everything. And when they compare the fasting versus non-fasting, and the non-fasting eats throughout the day, the fasting will either do like 8-hour window, sometimes 4-hour window, sometimes eating every other day, because that's called alternate day fasting. That's a common protocol in the research. No benefits. Like there's in no studies. I mean, the only benefit that's been shown is in some cases, people have a slightly lower fasting insulin level. And I've explained that on my podcast before, why I think that is, because I think it's just an adaptation to going long periods of time without eating. If your insulin doesn't go down a little bit, you will just get hungry because it'll drive your blood sugar down because you're not eating for a long period of time. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're having any like benefits, because everything that we've looked at, like, insulin sensitivity, muscle or fat loss, muscle maintenance, all shows about the same, except for muscle maintenance. It goes down when you're fasting compared to non-fasting, because you're going long periods of time without eating. So again, that was a fad, and a lot of people still, like, it's still a very popular thing. And there's always the next one. Like, the way that I've been in this field for quite a while now, and I've seen, like, the way that this field works is every 3 or 4 years, it's just whatever starts to go viral, you'll see the same people who are promoting fasting started promoting keto, started promoting carnivore, like
cold plunge.
Yeah, exactly. They just go through, and cold plunge is another one that there's no research showing any benefits of cold plunging. Now, it feels great. I go to Barton.
Don't break my heart.
Yeah, I go to Barton.
That's one that I feel like there is. I've always heard that there is a lot of research around inflammation and serotonin and all of that kind of stuff.
So it reduces your body's inflammatory response. That's not always a good thing. Your body has inflammation for a reason. So if you're exercising really hard and you need to perform again the next day, then you want to block that inflammatory response. So definitely cold plunge is going to help you to recover a little bit. But if you're lifting weights, that inflammatory response is what helps to rebuild your muscle mass. So if you go cold plunge, there's studies that show that cold plunging right after lifting will reduce muscle mass. And so from a health perspective, though, there's not one study that shows any reductions in inflammatory markers, improvements in metabolic health, in anything.
I hear Rogan all the time say that you get a 200% increase in dopamine up to 5 hours, and also that it turns white fat to brown fat.
Yeah, the white fat to brown fat thing is just, I mean, that doesn't matter. Like,
it's not I've done research. I'm just
no. So there's a study that shows that the difference, like, it was like the slightest change ever. And they didn't even have people. So a good study, you take people, you have them do the protocol, and then you see what happens. In that study, they took people who were cold water swimmers and then compared them to people who weren't. And then they said the people who were cold water swimmers had more brown fat. And so they said that they're cold water swimmers compared to people who aren't. So there's these studies where he had the woman who published that study on. And so when you talked about sometimes scientists disagree, sometimes scientists are very attached to their research, and they kind
of stack the deck a little bit. It sounds
exaggerate it quite a bit, of saying like, oh, because I saw her speak about her research too, and saying like, you need this many minutes of cold plunging, and it's like, you didn't test that at all. Like, they would have to be testing different protocols and seeing which one was better to give any of those type of recommendations. But you can say that you have a scientist, and you find the one scientist who thinks that this is like magical, and you can create a narrative when you cherry pick like that. And that's what happened with that. I looked at all that research, and I was like, man, it's mind blowing to me that I've seen it shared on multiple huge podcasts saying the same thing, giving specific recommendations of you need to do this much for health benefits. And it's all based on comparing cold water swimmers who swam this much to people who weren't swimmers. Like, there was one other study that was published on cold plunging. I have a podcast episode on this too. They compared, or they had people who would go in, what was it? They went in cold plunge, but they had to go out to a lake and do it. And they did it 3 times a week versus people who didn't. And it's like, you have to get out to the lake and walk out to the lake. Like, you're actually getting exercise too. And what they showed was that there was like the slightest reduction in body fat. It was like 0.1%. It was like super minor. And then the people reported like a slight improvement in overall well-being or something like that. It was very weak research. And I saw this shared on Huberman, where he shared this one and said, cold plunging, leads to fat loss and improves metabolism. And I went and read the study, and I'm like, these people had to walk out to a lake and go swim in a lake. Like,
they didn't do an actual study with a cold plunge?
No, they did. So that's where a lot of this research it's very weak.
That's weird. Well, have you seen the new study that's showing? I don't know if it's a study. I saw it on social media saying, notice everyone that cold plunges every day looks very old. And they were posting pictures of Rogan and then Wim Hof.
Oh, I didn't see all that. So
I had a lot of people send me that because they knew I did it every morning. I used to do it after I lifted until I heard about the hypertrophy and you kind of reverse your gains if you're lifting. And so now I do it first thing in the morning. I hate every second of it. I do it for 3 minutes. And when I get out, though, I'm wide awake and I'm feeling great.
It feels good.
It feels great when you get out. There's definitely like a high you get from it.
No, it feels great. But think about this. You would get that same high if you sprinted across the street. Like you would get that same high if like someone broke into your house. So your dopamine would go up by 5.
So you think you're
just shocking the hell out of your system. Okay. Like that's what
you think 3 minutes to 5 minutes?
No, like when you said that you hate every minute, you're just creating a very stressful situation that once you get out of it, you feel great.
Happy.
So if you just went on a sprint for 2 minutes in the morning, you would have that same effect, and then you would get some aerobic benefit from the sprint. Like there would probably be some benefits.
I've heard you get an increase in testosterone as well. So I've heard that powerlifters want to cold plunge an hour before they go lift.
There's no studies there's no studies that support any of this stuff. The only thing that I can find for health seems to be negative. And we only have data on like people who are exposed to cold from occupational environments. Okay. So like people who have to work in like deep freezers and go into them for minutes a day, that's like the only long-term evidence we have of like cold exposure. And they have heart disease like at a younger age and end up dying from like heart issues significantly younger than the average person. And in some of these studies, and these were published before like cold plunging got popular, because the idea that cold exposure might improve health has been around forever. You know, this is decades long. It's just, it becomes a trend when Wim Hof made it a trend. Like,
I feel like he's somewhere gasping this whole conversation.
Yeah. Well, so like think about this. It's social media. This would never have become a trend without social media, because you show yourself doing it, and you post it, and it's like, oh, I did this hard thing every morning, and that became a very popular thing in social media.
And two, I think with that, I mean, just to piggyback on that though, is I think with cold plunge, it kind of works so well because you actually do get a high.
You feel good.
So you can actually go and try it one time and get out and be like, wow, that was amazing. I mean, just a few weekends ago, I was in a pool with a friend of mine, and she got in and got out. I was trying to convince her to get in because it was freezing, and she got out. I was like, man, that feels amazing. And so it's like you actually do get that high. So it kind of like instantly verifies what you already thought going into it in a way.
That's why it works so well. But like I said, it's just shocking your system, and yes, it's going to wake you up because you're shocking your system. You're taking yourself into a very stressful situation. Just like I said, like if you're running from someone, or if someone broke into your house, or if you almost got in a car wreck, you would have that same experience for quite a bit of time afterwards. And at the same time, like when I say these things, I'm not saying that like you shouldn't do them. Like this, if you enjoy doing it, do it. Like that's a great thing to do, and build a lifestyle around doing things you enjoy. Like I go to Barton's. Like, remember I told you guys I used to live in San Marcos. I love swimming in spring-fed water, and that's why I live close. I live right next to Barton Springs now, so I could go there on a regular basis. And I love getting in. I love the way it feels. I feel like it does help. I work out pretty hard. Like I lift almost every day. I run several times a week. I'm sore quite a bit, and I feel like that does help me to be a little bit less sore when I do that on a regular basis. But the problem I feel is when people are kind of coercing people to do things based on misleading information and making people feel like they absolutely have to include it in their routine. Like, for example, when you said you hate every 3 minutes of that, what if you did something else that you actually enjoyed? Like instead, now it may not wake you up, or maybe you find something else that wakes you up that you enjoy. That's why I work out first thing in the morning. I wake up, I go work out. After I work out, I feel great for hours, and like maybe there's something else, but I think for everyone, it's like we have to be able to make informed decisions, and you can't make informed decisions when the information that's being presented to you is being presented to you in that way, like packaged in a very sensationalized, misleading way where you're like, I have to do cold plunge now because it has all these health benefits. And it's like, does it really? Like, and again, I enjoy it myself. if I had the space, I would probably put a cold plunge into my house, like, because I do enjoy the feeling, and I would do it occasionally.
So you're not saying this real negative health benefits.
I'm not saying
it's blown out of proportion negative. Of how great it is.
Yeah, that's what a lot of this stuff is. It's just like,
I do feel a lot better. So, running multiple businesses, it can be extremely stressful, and I notice it significantly 3 to 5 p.m. if I cold plunge, lifted weights, and sauna, had good lunch. I'm a lot more easygoing in the afternoon versus not.
Exercise is the best thing ever for that. Like there's tons of data on that. Like exercise reduces anxiety substantially. Like it's probably one of the most.
All right. So how about the opposite? How about the sauna?
How about the sauna? Sauna, there is some health benefits that have been shown with this.
Twice. I love
no. So again, sometimes they're a little bit exaggerated, but so there's studies to show that sauna use can reduce blood pressure, and then all of the studies that we have for long term show that there is a reduction in heart disease risk with regular sauna use. Some of that might be there may be some shakiness in the data because they're looking at people who go to the sauna 5 times a week,
working out all the time.
Yeah,
relatively those people are more healthy.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where,
compared to the general population, they're obviously going to be way less prone to heart disease than someone eating Whataburger every day, getting 1,000 steps in.
Yeah, so you're getting it now. Like that's the main. Like that's how a lot of this stuff is presented. I see this all the time. Sauna reduces heart disease risk by 40% because that's what that study showed, and it's like, yeah, it probably helps, but the fact that these people are going to the sauna 5 times a week, and these things are usually we try to take them into account with research. So like if you have large enough groups, you can just control for that. You can do statistical adjustments to control for like dietary habits, and they'll do like very detailed questionnaires to control for all that stuff. So sometimes that stuff is really well controlled for, and we do see that there's positive benefits of sauna use. But sauna, in studies where they have one group use a sauna and then they'll have another group like basically meditate for 20 minutes to mimic what would happen in the sauna, and then they're not exposed to heat, and that shows like reductions in blood pressure and improvements, and most likely going to be improvements in
with the meditation group.
No, the sauna.
Okay,
like the exposure to heat. Yeah.
And
sauna.
How about the difference between the infrared that gets up to 150, 160 versus an actual sauna that's strictly no infrared? Because we used to have the little box infrared, and I used that for years, and it was fine, but it didn't get as hot as the regular saunas at the gym that I would go to. So we built an actual purely heat, no infrared.
Well, this dude's a maniac too, and cranks it up. I think he had it up to like 240 yesterday. I'm like, dude, I think you're burning your lungs at that temperature. Like, it's probably a little too hot.
I mean, with sauna, I would look at it similar to exercise, and exercise is great until you do too much. And same thing with sauna is like, sauna is going to be great, but if you try to, it's not more is better. It's like small exposures to that heat is going to lead to some changes in your physiology, and you want to expose yourself to it to the degree that that's going to cause some changes, which seems to be maybe 20 minutes a day, like you said.
Yeah, I do about 15 to 20, then I do a cold shower, and then go back in for about another 10, and then
yeah. So the 240 might be too much, but
the sensor's up at the ceiling. I sit on the ground, so it's not that when I stand up, I'm like, oh shit.
That's somewhat exaggerated, but we're definitely getting over 200.
Well over 200.
So the studies show that it's usually they use about 170 to 190 usually, but 20 minutes ish is gonna be enough, and not even every day per week probably to do that. So I used to do, again, I read some of these studies when they first came out. I started doing sauna a lot, like every single day after my workout. And then I realized my workouts like suffered over time because it was just wearing me out. Like I would work out really hard, and then I would go do the sauna, and I'd be like exhausted for hours. And I'm like, what's going on? And then I stopped doing the sauna, and I was like, oh, that was just like an extra stress on top of all of the stress that I'm doing with my normal routine. So that's an important thing, is like sauna is going to be an extra stress on top of exercise, like in terms of like exercise is a stress. Like we want exposure to it because that's what helps us to adapt and improve, but we don't want to do too much. And sauna is like right there with that. And so I would just like lump that in with that. And like, if you're doing a lot of exercise, you may need to reduce the sauna a little bit if it's causing you to be like exhausted. And then you can do a little bit more if you're like a little bit more rested.
I find with the sauna, just me personally, I struggle with just being hydrated enough for it.
Yeah.
I feel like I work out. I feel like I have to be, for me to feel confident to go in there and do it, I feel like I have to be on my hydration game for like 2 days leading up to it, really hit it hard, and then hydrate so much after it. Because I'll find that myself. Like I'll do the sauna today and feel okay, and then wake up tomorrow and I'm like, oh, I'm so thirsty. Like I can just feel it in my body.
I take a half a gallon with the electrolyte packet in it for that 20 minutes. So I'll drink a half a gallon. Otherwise, I'll be depleted.
Yeah,
I try to drink a lot before it, during it, and then the rest of the day I'm fine.
Yeah.
Something I'm curious about, I want to get your take on, is the carnivore diet, because it's something that's been wrapping, kind of in my head a little bit. He's like somewhat kind of on it, not really, but he eats a lot of meat, and very healthy.
Yeah.
But with the carnivore diet, it seems like a lot of people have had a lot of success. And I'm curious, there's been, a lot of conversation around, is that diet actually good for you versus you're taking people that are eating a bunch of junk and then all of a sudden cutting all of that out and now just having meat. And so I'm kind of curious your take on that whole conversation.
It's a little bit of both. So the average person, someone who doesn't have chronic health issues, it's probably just because they're improving their diet. So they're going from eating junk to just eating a healthier diet, eating less, eating more nutritious. They feel better. There are people with digestive and autoimmune conditions who have sensitivities and immune and digestive reactions, because this is what I work with. Like my one-on-one clients are complicated digestive and autoimmune conditions, so I'm very familiar with this stuff. And these people have a variety of different reactions. Like for example, some of them don't tolerate nuts well, some of them don't tolerate beans well, some of them don't tolerate greens well for a variety of different reasons. And those people, when they go on to a carnivore diet, they feel like it completely transformed their health. Unfortunately, that diet is nutritionally inadequate and is going to lead to nutritional deficiencies over time, and is likely going to increase LDL cholesterol, which, depending on someone's genetics, like some people won't have much of an increase, other people will. Response to that type of diet when it comes to LDL cholesterol is largely genetic. LDL cholesterol is just largely genetic in general. But those people, like I've met people who they do it, they feel better, they reverse some of their like autoimmune and digestive issues because they cut out gluten and dairy and some other things that may have been a problem for them. And then they have a LDL cholesterol of 320, and it's like they're probably going to cut 10, 15, 20 years off their life, because a lot of people in this space, and I know anybody who's listening to this who's heard the carnivore diet information has probably heard that LDL cholesterol doesn't matter. That's not the case at all. Like all the research is very clear. LDL cholesterol particles, when they're floating around, it's like traffic. Like our blood vessels, like we have like cars floating around in our blood vessels, and that's what LDL cholesterol is. If you put more cars on the road, there's going to be more accidents. Like the data is very clear here. When people have genetically, because a lot of people will say, people only have high LDL cholesterol because of, whatever reasons. And if you have high LDL cholesterol and you don't have inflammation or obesity, like you're fine. People who have genetically high LDL cholesterol, who are perfectly healthy otherwise, but have genetically extremely elevated LDL cholesterol, die of heart disease 30, 40 years early if they're not treated. Like they will die extremely early because they have a lot of cars on the road. So they just have their liver produces a lot of LDL cholesterol particles, and that puts all those particles floating around in their blood. And some of those particles will get into your blood vessels and lead to the development of a plaque. Now we can reduce that through diet and nutrition and some of those things, but all things equal, we want less of those particles floating around in our blood. And a carnivore diet is the perfect diet to increase LDL cholesterol. It's very high in saturated fat, no fiber. So fiber clears LDL cholesterol from our intestines because we use cholesterol to make bile. Bile gets dumped into our intestines for digestion. If we eat fiber binds to that bile, helps to clear some of that out, helps keep our LDL cholesterol managed. If you eat no fiber, you don't clear any of that out. It just recirculates and reabsorbs. And then that saturated fat consumption from the animal foods causes your liver to put out more LDL cholesterol particles because it needs to transport that fat. So LDL cholesterol is transporting fat throughout the body. So if you're eating more animal-based fats, it will increase your LDL cholesterol in most people, not everyone. So that diet for those people, so people who don't have chronic health issues, they go on that diet, they maybe lose weight, feel better, skin improves, whatever. But then they have really high LDL cholesterol and they're putting themselves at risk for cardiovascular disease early. And eventually those people are going to develop most of those people are going to develop health issues from nutrient deficiency. So like they're not eating enough vitamin C. They may not be getting enough folate. They may not be getting any magnesium or potassium. And so these things over time will contribute to health problems. In the short term, they won't, but in the long term, they will. And this diet hasn't been popular for very long, and so we're not seeing a lot of the negative long-term effects. There's a page on social media called Carnivore Cringe where they basically screenshot. So they're in like some of these carnivore Facebook groups, and they just screenshot some of the things that people are saying.
Sure, it's pretty wild.
It's wild. I mean, I'm in like one of those Facebook carnivore groups because I was just curious. And almost every post is someone with a health issue from following the diet. And it's high LDL cholesterol, someone had a stroke, someone had kidney issues. And it's like this diet, for many people, it's just easy. And that's why they feel it's like, I've struggled with figuring out what to eat my whole life. And this person told me just eat meat. And I started doing that. I felt full and I lost weight and I felt better. And so I'm just going to stick to this forever. And it sounds great in the short term when you feel better, just like with a sauna, you feel better at first, 2 weeks, a month in, you feel great. And then 6 months later, when you start to experience the effects of potassium deficiency and you start having muscle cramps, then it's not so great. And this is the type of stuff that consistently happens. I mean, the guy who popularized the diet started eating fruits and other foods because he developed health issues. And unfortunately, his book is still selling and a lot of people are still doing the diet. And I mentioned that, people with chronic health issues, they feel better. Those people, those are the ones that I feel for because they're trying to find the right approach. And this is the one that just feels like the right one, because if you follow it and you were reacting to nuts and seeds and beans and you go on a carnivore diet, you're going to feel amazing. And those people, unfortunately, could have just figured out what they were reacting to, because it's what I do with the clients I work with. We're like, okay, let's simplify your diet. Let's take away some foods. Let's see how you do without these things and strategically figure out what people are not reacting well to or not tolerating well, and then help them build a diet that actually makes sense, that provides their meets their nutrient needs. That's the right approach. But unfortunately, our medical system pays no attention to nutrition, especially in these cases with digestive and autoimmune conditions. Those people, you rarely get any type of useful advice or any type of quality referral from their healthcare providers. So they just have to go to the internet and try to find answers. And the most compelling answers is right now a carnivore diet. Because if you're going and you're looking, I have a digestive or autoimmune condition, you get online, you're going to see all these people that said, oh, I had this too, and I went carnivore and I feel better. And it's very easy to see that and want to do it. And unfortunately, in my opinion, that's our medical system, just completely broken medical system that should be giving these people the right guidance. We have enough research, we have health professionals and nutrition professionals who could help these people, but insurance companies don't cover it. Doctors don't really know who to refer to. It's just a very convoluted system right now.
I'm just kind of curious because this whole space can feel a bit overwhelming. For instance, take me for an example. I work out a few times a week. I don't pay super close to my diet. I feel like as a whole, I eat relatively decent. I don't eat a lot of candy, don't drink soda, but also I get busy at work and it's lunchtime and I have 30 minutes and it's I'd rather eat something than just skip lunch. And I'm kind of bad about skipping meals and not eating enough. And so it's where do you start with this? So as someone like you have a new client. What would you do with someone like me? Do you do blood work? You kind of figure out where my diet's at? Where does someone start in this? The carnivore diet has seemed appealing to me because it kind of is that easy button. You're simple, oh, wow, yeah. I just eat meat. So simple. I can actually work with that. But you start talking about a balanced diet and this, that, my head's already man, that is so much work to prepare for your week, all your meals all the way. If I'm busy during the day, what do? I guess I'm meal prepping to make that happen. And so I guess, what's your advice to a busy professional that's working? Where do they start? What's kind of those first few steps to try to get your health in order? Yeah. That is the challenge, is the time and the preparation and knowing what to do. The reality is like you said, when you go to eat a meal, if a balanced meal, something that would generally provide,
the type of meals that I would generally recommend people eating, you're going to have about 1/3 protein on your plate, 1/3 some type of carbohydrate, 1/3 some type of veggie, and that could look a lot of different ways. Like a Asian stir fry that has a decent amount of vegetables and protein, and not, depending on where you get it from, it may have just like 90% noodles and very little, vegetables and protein. But if it's proportioned correctly, then you're getting, you're going to get some nutrients from the veggies, you're going to get your protein, you're going to get some carbohydrates, ideally some fiber if you're getting like whole grain carbohydrate. And so, generally speaking, that's like the simplest approach. Like if I sit down for a meal, I'm kind of looking for that. It depends on what someone's goals are and the amount of effort that they want to put in. Because some people, like you, for example, you may be like, I just want to figure out easy meals to eat. And so like, in your case would be like, okay, let's find 15 places around here because you live in Austin and there's lots of good options. And now when you are pressed for time for lunch, you just go to one of these places and order one of these 12 different things that you enjoy.
Figure out ahead of time. Meals that make sense for what you want. Okay.
Exactly. That's all it comes down to. Figuring out ahead of time the meals that make sense for you, because we all have different needs. And like for me, for example, I need, and this helps, like I teach this a lot, but you don't have to go this far. But if you really want to like understand your nutrition, like I think it helps to understand the amount of calories that you need and the amount of protein that you need, because this is what dictates weight gain and weight loss. Like this is what dictates body composition. If you're trying to gain weight, gain muscle, lose weight, that comes down to your energy needs and making sure that you're eating the right amount of energy for those needs. So like for me, for example, I need about 3,200 calories a day to maintain my current weight. So that's like 800 calorie meals. That means I eat pretty big meals. If they're healthy meals, 800 calories is pretty big. If it's not healthy, it's just a burger and you're full. But if you're eating like the pattern that I just mentioned, where you're having, quarter or a third of your plate protein, third of it veggies, a third of it, some type of whole grain, high fiber carbohydrate, ideally, you're going to be full. And you basically, for most people, if you did that, you can just eat to fullness and you would be able to regulate your weight. Now, other people are going to be different. It depends on your environment, how much you're prone to snacking, all of those type of things. And so that's where I say that oftentimes I like to teach people like, okay, let's figure out your energy needs. Let's figure out your protein needs. Let's see what that looks like in a day. And then let's figure out how that's going to work for you long term. Because at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. A lot of people will try to stick to something for a couple of weeks and then they just don't enjoy it. Like it has to be enjoyable. You have to figure out, okay, breakfast, what do you like to eat? How can we make that in a way that makes more sense for your needs? Because currently the donut and coffee doesn't, but we can do some protein pancakes and a protein coffee or something like that with some berries on top. And maybe that makes sense. And you can prep that ahead of time, or you can find some place that offers it. There's a lot of it is starting from where you are and like figuring out where you want to go. And when it comes to a one-on-one client, like I can help them do that. When it comes to, someone kind of figuring out their own nutrition, that's why I always emphasize the importance of education, because truly, like if you detach yourself from all the craziness on social media, like I have a course that basically goes through everything that I just talked about. Like how do you figure out your calorie needs? How do you figure out your protein needs? And most people could go through that in 3 months and like never worry about getting on social media again. Is that
something you offer people to go online that's and buy it through on your services?
Exactly. So that's one of the things that I do is like I offer courses. And so with that, someone can take that, go through it. If they spent 30 minutes a day for 3 months, they will understand pretty much everything that they need to know to set up their own diet. And then you just detach from the social media stuff. Because when you get on like social media and podcasts, it is just like they have to always be selling you something new. That's the only way that it's going to continue to work is if they have this new sensational product and this greens powder, this probiotic, this
raw milk.
Yeah, exactly. Raw milk right now, which is, there's just no point in it. Like there's pasteurized milk has the exact same nutrients as raw milk. And there isn't anything in raw milk that is that you don't get from pasteurized is just like slightly heating up the milk. It's not even boiling it. It's like a slight heat to kill off some of the pathogenic bacteria. It's like up to 145, I think, for like 30 seconds to kill off some of the pathogenic bacteria, and then they bring it back down. It doesn't kill any nutrients, but currently on social media there's like this big trend of you have to drink raw milk because the nutrients in pasteurized milk are destroyed, and that's just completely made up. And right now there's currently not an outbreak, but they tested one of the raw milks in California. They had to stop selling it because it had bird flu in it, and this is, I mean, the currently the cases of people having major sicknesses or death from raw milk are very low because the consumption level is still low. But if it continues to increase, I mean, when we look at the numbers over the last 20 years, there's been the same amount of outbreaks and deaths and hospitalizations from raw milk and pasteurized milk, but pasteurized milk is consumed at 10,000 times. No, it's thousands times higher. So like you're talking about, we would extrapolate thousands times more hospitalizations and deaths, which is right now it's only like been 2 over the last 20 years. But if that's 2,000 and mostly kids, that wouldn't be acceptable. And it sounds good, and I see this all the time. Oh, I've been drinking raw milk for 2 years and I don't have any issues. And that's fine. But this is why we have public health measures, because when we look at, we understand that when we extrapolate things out to 300 million people, yeah, maybe you're fine, but that 2-year-old kid who starts drinking raw milk, who has a compromised immune system, isn't going to be. And that's like not a risk that really makes sense from a population level in the food supply.
I feel like milk is, whether it's raw or not, has always had a lot of mixed feelings on whether it's good for you or not. And I think some people have dairy sensitivities, but take those folks out. As a whole, how do you feel about milk? I mean, is it something that you think that we should be drinking? Does it actually build strong bones? I mean, how do you feel about it?
In terms of building strong bones, I mean, strong bones is largely activity. Strong bones is more activity.
That's like their marketing campaign forever.
Exactly. Well, it is a major form of calcium in Americans' diet. So that's where, yes, it can help with bone health from that perspective. Milk is nutritious. So high in protein, calcium, has other B vitamins as well. So I'm all for milk. You mentioned dairy sensitivities. So there is a decent percentage of people, like probably 10-15% of the population, if not more, who have sensitivities to the proteins in the dairy. So it's not even the lactose intolerance. They have slight reactions to the proteins in the dairy. It may cause like acne or eczema or some other negative responses. And again, most people perfectly fine, but there's usually, with almost every food, there's like a small percentage of the population who just doesn't tolerate it well. And oftentimes those people they'll use their experience to tell other people that they shouldn't drink it or shouldn't use it. But overall, dairy is definitely a nutritious food.
How about green drinks?
What do you mean by green drinks?
Like AG1 and
definitely not.
AG1's the biggest one, but
no, it's so overpriced, and you're getting like such a small amount of greens. Like, just put some greens in your food. Like, it's so easy to add like spinach or some other greens to meals.
I've been told that you could eat 10 pounds of salad and you won't get as much nutritional value as you would from 2 scoops of.
Oh no! So I have a podcast on this too, where I talk about what's in there, and you'd be much better off buying a multivitamin that costs 50 cents a day, like a really high quality multivitamin, and then having a serving of greens in your meal. Now, you've been told that because the marketing's great. Like this
nailed the marketing.
This company made, I think they made $100 million last year, and this is all off influencer marketing. And they pay, these companies reach out to me all the time. The reason, like, the companies you see promoted the most are the ones that pay the highest commissions. Like, that's really what it comes down to. I think their commission is like 40%. So if you spend $100, I would get $40 off of that every single time. So if I started promoting those on my podcast, I have 20,000 followers just on Spotify, probably another 20,000 on Apple.
Congrats, by the way. That's great.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. So if I got, a couple percentage of people to start doing this, like a couple hundred people, that'd make me quite a bit of money. Yeah, that made me quite a bit of money every single month.
The same, because they all advertise that they're better or different.
So the AG1 there's a company called Amazing Grass, and they have a green drink that they've been putting out for years that is like almost the same as AG1. They have some of their formulations are pretty close to AG1. and they're $25. Like it's 1/4 the price, because that's how large the margins are on AG1. They're producing a very, very inexpensive product and marking it up substantially because
How about First Form's green drink?
I'm not familiar with that one, but it's usually all of the green drinks on the market are about the same. It's just they're taking some powdered forms of a little bit of greens, which ends up being like what you would get from less than a serving of like actually eating greens. And then they're adding in like very, very small amounts of powdered forms of other things just to put a bunch of things on the ingredients list. So they're putting in like, it'll say like 50 milligrams of blueberry powder. 50 milligrams of blueberry powder is absolutely nothing. Like they're just doing that to put it on the label so that they can say we have 72 superfoods, and it's part of the marketing. Yeah. So I was very interested in going that route when I first got into like social media and online. Like I mentioned, I like reached out and, paid for like marketing courses, and I just started to see like this isn't what people need. Like, and if I do this and my career is around, selling this greens powder and this thing, I'm like, this isn't actually what people need. Like it's not that it's harmful in any way. It's just like you're much better off in most cases just eating more produce, just eating some greens.
Expensive urine, just peeing it out.
I mean, you're not peeing it out, but it's just not. It's not much. You're taking in. Like, think about if you ate a plate of fruits and vegetables and then think about what you're getting into this little scoop. It's like you would get in so much more micronutrients from actually just eating those foods. And I know that's hard. And in some cases, like I have some clients who can't tolerate fruits and vegetables. They could benefit from some additional nutrition. Juicing is just out of reach for them because it just costs too much, too time consuming. Maybe I might recommend a greens powder in that case for that person to get some additional nutrients in their diet.
On the go, it's better than nothing.
Yeah. Like in that case, you are going to get some nutrients, and so like, yeah, I would definitely if you're going to go greens powder versus nothing, yeah. But the thing with that is like, would I ever say, hey, you should go out and buy a greens powder? I wouldn't ever promote that. I would focus more on just
asparagus and avocados are better.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And like when you mentioned on the go, like I'd rather someone grab an apple. You know what I mean? Yeah, like those things are going to be much better for improving nutrition over the long term. And with the supplements, I mean, there's just going to be a new one, and then there's going to be another new one. And with nutrition, stuff doesn't change. Like I've been
same foods Indians are eating.
I've been doing the same thing for over a decade now, and it's like I don't have to really change anything. Like I just keep doing the same thing, and it's easy for me now. Like you mentioned, it's hard at first, and if you're like, all right, nutrition's important for me, I really want to make this part of my life. You have to understand that it's going to be a process early on. And that process, this is why I get so frustrated with all the misleading information, is because when people come to that realization and they're like, okay, nutrition's important, I want to improve it. Like this is the best time for us to really help people make improvements to their health. And this is what we really need as a country, like for the average person to be eating healthier and reducing rates of chronic disease and things like that. But when someone in the United States wants to go look for, they make that decision and they go look for nutrition and health information, if you look at the top 10 best-selling books, it's all nonsense. Like it's just one person's telling you to go vegan, one person's telling you to fast, one person's telling you to go carnivore. And that's how I got into this space, is I started reading all those best-selling books. And that's why I decided to get a PhD, because I was like, I am confused. Like I read hundreds of books. I've spent over 1,000 hours reading all that I could about this topic, and I can't make sense of it, because it's just this person's telling me this person's telling me this. They're telling me that I need to, buy all these specialty products and have all these supplements and only buy organic food at a farmer's market. And it's like you end up, a lot of people end up, it's like you either give up or you have to kind of revolve a lot of your life around it. And it's like, that's not what nutrition should be. Like, it's just, eating is just something that we do. And if you have the right strategies in place, it's a part of your life. And I oftentimes, like when I go out and people, when I go out and meet new people who aren't in my field and stuff, and they're like, oh, you're a nutritionist. Like, why are you eating that or whatever? And it's like, that's not what it is. Like, it's just understanding how your body works, making sure that those needs are met. And then, focusing on the bigger picture in terms of health, which is much more than nutrition. Your career and your passions and your exercise and your relationships, all these other things matter. And I meet so many people who get so caught up in like trying to worry about all these little details in nutrition that they, forget or don't put in the investment and effort that they need to do for other things that will improve their health more.
Go ahead. Also, you had mentioned earlier, it just caught my attention, you recommended, maybe there's just like a cheap multivitamin you could take every day, it's kind of base level. Is there a specific brand or one that you would tell people to buy in that space? Yeah.
So there's a brand called Thorne. They have a 2-a-day multivitamin. And then there's another one called, what's it called? Pure Encapsulations.
And those are both good?
They have it's called ONE multivitamin. Mm-hmm. Those are the two that I recommend the most. I take the Pure Encapsulations one myself just because it's only one capsule and I prefer that. It's just easier for me. But yeah, those are good. So most people have some nutrient deficiencies. Like most people are just not eating enough like zinc or vitamin A, and taking a multivitamin can sometimes help you just meet those baseline needs. And there's some studies that show that there's like some benefits to it. Now, a lot of people go out and take really cheap multivitamins from the grocery store. I don't recommend that. If a good one's really not that expensive. Like the two that I mentioned I think they're 50 to 75 cents a day, something like that.
Okay, that's awesome. Not bad.
I want to talk about kind of factory farming and protein intake.
Oh, yeah.
I hunt a lot, so I eat a lot of wild game, primarily elk. But several days a week, we take a client to lunch and we'll go get a steak for lunch. And I know that steak was, corn fed and not grass fed. But I'm just curious on the truth behind grass fed versus grain fed versus wild game.
Yeah.
What your opinion on all that is?
So the differences between like a grass-fed steak from a nutritional standpoint are very small. You'll hear that it has 5 times more omega-3 fatty acids and things like that. That is like no beef is a good source of omega-3 fats. And so that I've heard that so many times of like grass-fed beef has this much more omega-3 fats, but it still has very little. Like you could eat like a small piece of salmon and get more omega-3 fats from an entire steak. It's not a source of omega-3 fats. So it is slightly more nutritious, but that difference is pretty small. And so when I work with clients who are taking their budget into consideration, oftentimes I don't recommend going grass-fed because the difference is very small. They get slightly higher of a few different nutrients in the beef, and it's slightly lower saturated fat content in the beef. But if it's, twice as much and someone's on a limited budget, they're feeding a family, I usually don't recommend that. Someone who doesn't have to worry about, the finances and has access to like local, farm raised animals, like I would definitely go with that route. If you have access to it, definitely go with that. But if not, it's not that big of a deal. Like the difference from a nutritional standpoint, the difference close. Is small. Like it's I'd say like a 10% difference, if that.
Okay. How about farm raised salmon versus wild caught salmon?
That completely depends on the farm. So if you can imagine that some farms do a really good job with their feed, with their environment, with the cleanliness of the water. So a farm raised fish can in some cases be more nutritious and less like contaminated than a wild caught because they create such a pristine environment. Gotcha. But that completely depends on the farm. So it's really hard to know. I did a podcast on that too, where I'm like, when they compare, it's the same thing. There's a slightly higher nutrient content on average in the wild caught versus the farm raised. But it just varies so much in the farm raised because some of them are just raised
totally
differently.
Depending on the farm.
Yeah,
how would you know? I mean, if I was to go to the store and buy salmon,
you
right
have
now,
no idea.
Is there any way? Is there salmonfarm.com? You can go look at.
Yeah, you have no idea, and that's where like if you're really worried about sourcing with those things, you just have to know the source that you're getting it from. Yeah,
Typically means you have to fork over more money.
It's going to cost
more,
quite a bit more, and that's so. Here's the thing with that though is. You don't have to spend that money. If you have the money to and you want to, it's great. But our food supply, even though like I'm not a fan of the factory farming and a lot of the practices that go on, but our food supply is one of the safest food supplies in the world. And we have the safest food supply in the history of our existence as humans. So I know a lot of people who are very like, they think everything in the grocery store is poison and things like that. And it's like, we have like we know more about our food and we have like there's so many regulations in place that create a very safe food supply than more than any other time in history. But social media tries to make it seem the opposite, because if I scare you away from eating, some type of ingredient, I can sell you a product without that ingredient that costs 2 or 3 times as much. Like there's whole industries that are completely based off of like in the food industry, there are many brands that they exist completely from social media myths where, for example, seed oils is very popular right now. Like there's no studies to show that someone who eats seed oils has negative health effects. And there's many studies where they compare people who eat butter versus people who eat seed oils. And they'll use canola oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil. They've used them all. And the butter has more negative health effects because of the saturated fat content, and because saturated fat can have a negative effect on metabolism if you eat enough. And this has been done multiple times, but on social media, you will find that most people will say that seed oils are poisoning you and that you need to eat butter instead. So there's entire companies of like, they'll just use seed oil free chips and seed oil free, and it's like, if they're using, so they're frying the food. Like it's still not healthy, even if you use butter or tallow or whatever you're changing it for. Like it's still a food fried in a lot of oil, which is a concentrated fat. And the differences between those oils are, the seed oils from a health perspective, depending on how much oxidation occurs during the frying process, like they may be better off. And so people are paying substantially more, 3 or 4 times as much. I went to Sprouts the other day and I was like, all the chips were like seed oil free and they were significantly more expensive. And I'm like, we're often paying that due to marketing. Like a lot of times it's just marketing. And so at the same time, a lot of these companies do make higher quality products. Like for example, a seed oil free Doritos is going to have better ingredients overall, typically, but it just doesn't taste the same. Like for me, because I used to go and buy all those things, like, and I'm like, I'll just have my Doritos and enjoy it, and the rest of my diet is good and not worry about it.
So I primarily see seed oils in highly processed foods. So is that where people get the negative connotation? So by itself, it might not be that toxic for you, but given that it's in a disgusting processed cereal bar, that's what's getting you?
That's exactly it. And it's used in all fried foods. That's the big thing. Fried and processed foods. So basically, if you tell someone to avoid seed oils, they have to avoid most fried and processed foods. And so if you do that, you're going to improve your health. And that's another one that like, it's a very simple message that leads people to seeing a positive benefit really quickly. And they just latch onto it, and then that perpetuates it. And anytime I talk about this topic, I get so much backlash from people who are like, I gave up seed oils and I feel so much better. And I'm like,
yeah, but what else did you give up?
Exactly.
With
every time,
gave up all the shit, and that's why you feel better.
That's what it is every time. Because again, I went through these phases in my early 20s where I would give up dairy and gluten, and as I just learned more and started adding these things back in, I'm like, man, I was just like following these trends and not really realizing like I just need to focus on what does my body need? Like, for example, if you purchase a car, like, it comes with an instruction manual. it tells you what your car needs. You need a certain type of gas, you need a certain type of oil, you need a certain type of windshield wiper fluid, all of that stuff. Your body needs certain things. And it's like, that's what we need to know. Your body needs a certain amount of calories, certain amount of protein, micronutrients. Good to get a certain amount of fiber. Fruits and vegetables are good. You know, trying to eat a variety of different foods can be a good thing. If you know that and you have your instruction manual and you just stick to it. It just doesn't need to be much more complicated than that overall. And with these little things like the chocolate and where it does sometimes get a little bit more complicated, that's why I say it's kind of best to just like remove yourself from some of that, because it'll just cause you to keep getting confused. And like, for example, me, I eat dark chocolate pretty much every day as a snack. If I didn't know any better and I saw that headline, it would completely disrupt my dietary choices, and it would make me feel like, okay, what I'm doing is wrong. And then I would need, if I didn't understand how to go into that research and figure it out, like I would need someone to explain that to me. And I do all that stuff on my podcast because that's, you know, that's what people come to me for, is I'm the one that's going into all of these topics and explaining it. But oftentimes it's just better to like remove yourself from it. I tell people this all the time because they'll send me all these posts and they're like, can you tell me if this is true or this is not? And I'm like, just stop listening to it. Like if you just, when you see something that seems sensational and you're like, you know, it kind of messes with your thought process around nutrition, like just scroll on. If you can get a couple of good sources, and you don't need to, I hear people say this too, like, I want to get multiple opinions. And I'm like, that's great, but there's only one right one. and so you're taking like the right ones and trying to reconcile that with like just a bunch of bullshit. And it's like, how do you do that? How can you, when like, for example, people follow me and I tell them like, okay, how do you lose weight? You have to eat less calories than you burn. And then this other person's like, no, it's because your cortisol levels are high and you need to, and it's like, how can you reconcile those two things if you're placing the same amount of trust in each person? And, you know, if you want to go trust that person, go ahead. But like, you're going to be best off actually trusting people who have the educational background and then the experience too, because I've worked in this field for quite a while. And again, I have a lot of colleagues who have an educational background, experience, and they're saying the same stuff I am. Like almost all of us are promoting the same things, you know, and coming to the same conclusions separately. Like it's not like we're all just colluding together and saying like, hey, let's all start promoting this thing. It's like, I read the research and this is what the conclusion that I've came to, and so did you. And we just happen to be aligned on most topics, because when you look at the research, you can't mess with it. It's like when you actually look at the scientific research, which is just, it's difficult to interpret. Like the average person isn't going to be able to just go read studies and make sense of them, because there's, like I mentioned earlier, there's methods, there's ways of feeding people, there's different ways of assessing things, there's statistical adjustments that are made, and you have to be able to understand all of that and then understand how that fits into the context of like the overarching picture of nutrition. And that just takes so much time. I've been in this field for 15 years now. I learn something new all the time. And so trying to be that, you know, that type of nutrition detective, I don't recommend. It's better to find a couple of good sources and learn it, and then just not continue like to you know, follow a variety of different people and get all these different messages, because like I said, it'll lead you down the wrong path and taking you to having to feel like you continuously need to try this new method or do this new supplement, do this new diet, and it's just not where you want to be. Like I mentioned earlier, I've been mostly doing the same stuff for over a decade now. I'm never like worried about like, okay, I need to try this new diet, or is this going to help? Like, it's just minor adjustments. Okay, I drank a little bit more than I wanted to this month and ate out a little bit more. Maybe I need to dial it in next month a little bit. Like just small things over time once you get a good routine in.
For someone that's, you know, I'd say new into the health space, or someone who hasn't paid much attention to it, and they're like, hey, I want to get my health in order. How important is blood work? I feel like you hear about that a lot more recently, and like kind of knowing where your levels are at. Do you think that's a good place to start and understand that baseline? Or is that kind of like you'll get there kind of thing? I
think it's really good. the habits are going to be the same, mostly the same regardless. Like the things that are beneficial to your health are going to be mostly the same regardless if you're pre-diabetic or have a higher cholesterol level. You may need to get some adjustments made to your blood work or make some adjustments to your diet based on your blood work. But I wouldn't necessarily say, okay, I'm going to wait to do that before I make changes. Yeah. Now, blood work is important. There are things, this is such a difficult space because a lot of people are getting insufficient blood work through their doctor. Like they probably should get a little bit more testing done. Like there's fasting insulin would be helpful. There's another marker called apolipoprotein B, which is the best marker for heart disease risk, which most doctors aren't testing. But there's also a lot of companies that are selling like advanced blood work where it's just a whole bunch of measures that you don't really need. And this is part of their marketing is they measure 100 different things so that they can tell you 20 of them or 5 of them or 10 of them are out of range. And then they use that to sell you supplements, like in almost every case. So there's a lot of companies that operate like this where they sell advanced blood work and then they run all these measures. And if you're doing testing, the more tests you do, the more likely there's going to be one that comes out in the red. So if you run 100, 150 different measures, you're going to see multiple things come out in the red. And yeah, there's a brand of medicine called functional medicine. I don't know if you guys have heard of that, but that's largely what that is. It's just a business model where they bring people in, they say they have this advanced specialized testing. They have them spend all this money on testing where you get a bunch of markers and they just use that to scare people into treatment protocols. It's like, okay, and it's not always like this, but a lot of the clients that I work with came from functional medicine doctors and they come to me and it's very, very common where it's like you come in, there's a hormone test called a Dutch test, and then they do like an organic acids test, they do a stool test, and they have 350 different measures. And so when you come into the office, they have red marked up on 25, 30 different things and
scare you right into pulling your credit card out.
You how do you say no to that?
Take my money.
Yeah. Such a good marketing. You know, it's like if you went and inspected a house and you're like, oh, you have all these things wrong. You just kind of made it all up. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, that's what's going on. And there's no regulation, unfortunately.
So follow-up question, that would be, here locally to Austin, if I wanted to go have my blood work done, I don't really like my primary doctor in all transparency. Where would I go? Who do I call?
I need to look into that. So what I personally do is I have what's called direct primary care. And so with this, with the setup that I have, I pay monthly, and it's a monthly fee directly to the doctor. And so this is becoming more common. There's probably a lot of places in Austin that do this. I've been at the place that I've been at for a couple of years, and I like it. But it's in Buda, it's south. And you pay like $80 to $150 a month, depending on the practice, and then you can see that doctor whenever you want. Like you can schedule an appointment anytime. You basically have access to them. Typically, there's like a texting platform or some type of messaging platform too. So like you can literally text the doctor and say like, "Hey, I'm having a sore throat. What do you recommend?" And they can prescribe you a medication like right there. Really great way to get your health care if you have access to it.
So that's like in lieu of health insurance or in addition to.
So what I do and what a lot of people do is you kind of use this as your primary care, and then you hold on to insurance for more major issues. Okay. So with that fee though, you don't get like it doesn't cover like labs and all that stuff like a treatment. But what they do is they give you all of your labs at cost, which is extremely inexpensive. Like labs cost almost nothing. You're just getting upcharged by insurance companies. So if you go to your doctor and you ask your doctor for apolipoprotein B and insulin and all these other things, you might get charged. I've had clients come back to me and they're like, "Oh, they charged me $600." And I'm like, "We could have bought this online for like $50."
So would a client of yours, would you be saying, "Hey, go to your doctor and I want these test runs and give me those results and then we'll review them together"?
Yes. Okay. Typically, or if they don't have a good relationship with their doctor, like you said, you can just buy them online.
Like, the test online.
Yeah. So if someone's working with their doctor already, like I wouldn't tell someone to just completely not have, traditional medical care because things can happen. Yeah. But if they're like, "Oh, my doctor, I can't see him for a while. It's snowing. I don't want to go through that. Like, you can just buy these things online. Like, you can get a whole comprehensive. I'm actually going to do a podcast on this in the next month where I talk about like the basic labs that I recommend and then link some of the places that you can purchase them. But there's like any lab test online. There's multiple, Life Extension, and you buy it online. You go to LabCorp or Quest Diagnostics, like whichever one's around you. They draw your blood. They send you the results in like 2 days.
Oh wow, how cool.
3 days usually. So
is Ways to Well one of the ones that tests 500 things to sell you stuff?
I'm not familiar with that one. I know a few others, so I'm not familiar with that one. But
I just know they're a local Austin-based thing that I've heard multiple times of people going to get peptide treatment, and
probably
Rogan loves Ways to Well, so I hear that all the time.
Usually when there's peptide treatment involved, there's a lot of this other stuff like IV therapy, peptide treatment. These things usually go together. It's the business of wellness, the business of health, and when reality, like, health doesn't come down to spending all of this money on things like being healthy. Your biggest investment should be on having access to fitness stuff in your area and then quality food. Like, you shouldn't be investing a whole bunch of money into like IV therapies and any of these other things like
hyperbaric oxygen.
Yeah, exactly. Like the setup you guys have, like with the gym and the sauna and stuff, that's where the best place you can be investing in your health is like create a scenario where eating healthier and exercising and moving and like making that easier for yourself. So investing into creating a home gym, getting multiple gym memberships in the areas that are close to you so that it's convenient for you. Buying like you said, food prep, or getting like healthy food prep. If you want to invest in your health, those are the things that I would recommend. And then also, like, many people would benefit from either learning about nutrition, figuring out some type of way to learn. Like I mentioned, I have a course, or working with the coach for a while. Because if you work with a good coach who's actually teaching you and you're having conversations like this every time, you 3 months, 6 months, you can figure out, they will teach you everything you need to know, help you build those habits, provide some accountability. And then 3 or 6 months down the line, you don't need them anymore. Like, a good coach is one that wants you to fire them and wants you to teach them, wants to teach you how to do it for yourself. And then you can go on and kind of do that from there.
That's great. I know it's not this black and white as I'm about to approach this, but for someone that's new, again, trying to get a hold of their health, I think, as we've kind of talked about, a lot of it can be pretty overwhelming. And obviously, it comes down to diet and exercise are the biggest factors here. But is there a priority of one over the other? If someone's like, hey, I've got 5 hours a week that I'm going to set aside to block out, would you recommend spending that time on exercise, or would you say meal prep before that?
Probably exercise. And here's why. Because exercise improves the way that your body works. So nutrition provides us with the fuel that we need and gives us some of like the micronutrients that help to protect us against aging to a certain degree. But exercise upgrades everything. Like, it makes your heart work better, your blood vessels work better, your lungs work better, your muscles, your bones, your tendons. Like, it just strengthens and improves everything. And oftentimes exercise leads to better dietary choices. So for a lot of people, when they exercise hard, they don't want to just go out and eat an unhealthy meal
afterwards. After I work out hard, it's like, I don't want the junk. My body is just craving something different.
Exactly. So oftentimes I just say, like, when someone's coming to me in that perspective, I'm like, just focus on exercise. And I actually just posted something about this on social media recently. Like, if you have to do one or the other, just focus on exercise, put your energy there. Don't even worry about the nutrition, because truly, like, you can get, like, I don't want to say it's better than nutrition, but it provides more resiliency with your nutrition. Like, if you exercise quite a bit, you can eat less healthy than someone else and still get the same results in terms of body composition, in terms of health, because your body just works better. You improve the way that your body works so it can handle a little bit more fried food or things like that, because you create those energy, you burn all that energy off, so there's more energy reserves, and your body just works and handles those things better.
Wow, that's interesting. How would you recommend when it comes to exercise? I like to lift weights. I'm kind of bad sometimes on the cardio aspect. Am I really shooting myself in the foot there? I mean, is cardio pretty crucial to everything?
So cardio, the thing with cardio is you're just not going to feel it over the short term, but it's your heart and blood vessels. It's the lifting weights for your heart and blood vessels. And heart disease is the number one cause of death in the United States, or pretty much everywhere. And so in terms of reducing your risk of chronic disease, reducing your risk of heart disease, reducing your risk of cancer, exercising aerobically is probably a little bit better than resistance training. The combination is better than either, like by far. So if you're like, you got 5 days, split them between the two is going to be ideal. But I know a lot of people don't like doing cardio. It doesn't make us look stronger, and it's really hard. Like,
well, it's harder. I think lifting weights is almost easy compared to doing cardio.
Yeah, exactly. You know? It's hard. Cardio is basically getting past telling your brain's just telling your body, like, what the hell are you doing? Like, stop. Like, there's no point in doing this.
I'm not being chased by a lion.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and you have to like turn that off. Like, that's, I feel like cardio is a lot of more mental at first. Like, you have to learn how to just like endure through this slight amount of pain for a long period of time. And I think that's, there's some mental benefits to that as well. But from a physical health standpoint, your heart, lungs, blood vessels, like that's what cardio works. So like, your resistance training, you're working your chest and arms. Like when you're cardio, you're working your heart and blood vessels. And my recommendation would be like create some targets for yourself. If it's hard for you, like, okay, I'm going to go run a mile and see how quickly I can do it, and then see if I can improve that over time. Cause that's when it starts to get really exciting. Like same thing with lifting. Once you start to get stronger, once you see the growth, it starts to get a little bit easier. But yeah, cardio is hard for me too. Like I dislike one. Now that I live on the trail, it's a lot easier for me. But I can't do cardio very well if it's not outside. But one thing with that is like, not approaching cardio is just running. You're thinking about all the different ways to do cardio. So before I lived in the city next to the trails, like I had a heavy bag in my garage, and that was my cardio. A lot of times I would just go run a quick mile and then like box for 20 minutes. And that was like, I actually enjoyed that. And I stuck to that. So there's other ways of doing cardio that I would recommend, like trying to figure out, like maybe you like kayaking, you can go out on the kayak for 45 minutes, a couple days a week or something like that. Just figuring out other things that you can do that are going to still get your heart rate up and keep it up. Like anything that gets your heart rate up and keeps it up is going to count as cardio, and is going to work those systems that I talked about. That's
great. You had done a post a while back. I don't know if I remember the whole context, but I wanted you to touch on it with, you're basically saying that, if budget is a part of the equation, which it is for most people when buying your food, and you go into the produce section, you were basically saying don't buy organic. Yep. And so could you break that one down? I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. So just like what I mentioned a second ago, the difference nutritionally between organic and non-organic is very similar to like the meat discussion. Like organic produce generally tends to be slightly more nutritious, but it's 10%, 15%.
Well, I never thought about, when I think about organics when it comes to produce, I would never look at two apples, one being organic, one being not organic. To me, in my head, they would have the same nutritional value. Yeah. One just wasn't sprayed with chemicals. Yeah. And so to me, that's the differential. They're not necessarily like the nutritional.
Yeah, I was going to get to that point too.
Sorry.
We have pesticide residue limitations on our produce that are set at 1,000 times lower than what would potentially cause health problems. So we test these pesticides in animals, we figure out the lowest dose that causes health problems in animals, and then we divide that by 1,000, and that's the maximum amount that can be found in pesticide residues on produce. And so there are pesticide residues on, 40% of the produce doesn't have any, even non-organic. So you're buying conventional produce, a lot of that doesn't have any residues at all. The ones that do have residues, it's very low, and you're not actually being exposed to like a harmful level of any residues. There's lots of safety testing done on this, and you can wash off 90% of the residues just by washing it in water. If you soak your produce in water, you can wash all that off. And so if the cost difference is small, then it might make sense to go with organic. But for most people, if you're paying twice as much, and it's just not worth it from that perspective, because the residue difference, I forgot to mention, the organics food also uses pesticides. Like they just use organically approved pesticides. Like it's not that they're not using pesticides, they're just using organically approved pesticides, which aren't safer than non-organically improved pesticides. They're just made from organic materials. Like we know, that doesn't mean they're safer. Some of the organic pesticides are actually more toxic than the conventionally used pesticides, and they have to use more of them in a lot of cases to get the same effect because the chemical pesticides are just so highly targeted at what they do because they're made in a lab to be able to do that. And so that's why like you're looking at, it's not that you're getting no pesticide residues. You're still getting them in organic sometimes, and we don't know if it's much more safer, but even in the conventional produce, the pesticide residues are so low that it's not going to be an issue in terms of health.
If budget isn't an issue, would you be buying organic?
I would still base it on the produce.
Just by looking at it and seeing,
yeah. That's what I go for a lot of times right now anyway. Like I even sometimes when organic doesn't cost much more, I still buy the conventional one because it looks better. Like that's largely what I base it on, is the quality of the produce as opposed to like the label. There's no case where I'm just like purchasing organic because it's organic. Yeah. Like just paying a bit more to purchase it. Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting.
And I used to buy 100% organic. Like there was a point in time where I kind of got scared about the pesticide residues before I read this research and actually looked into it. And I used to buy 100% organic. And then I was like, I read this research and I was like, wow, I saved 40% on my grocery bill. And like, I didn't change anything. This was 10 years ago. I haven't bought primarily organic in that long. And I was kind of worried about it at first because I heard all these pesticide residues and it's going to cause cancer. But when I read into the research, I'm like, oh, wow, this was just another thing that's just, yes, it's exaggerated. There's residues, but they're so low that they are not causing problems in anyone. Like pesticide residue. People don't eat produce. Pesticide residue, like the average American eats less than one serving of fruits, less than one serving of vegetables per day. Like pesticide residues are not the issue. It's lack of exposure to them through eating more fruits and vegetables that most people are, having a negative health effect from.
Interesting.
So it is true though that a cup of Bluebell before bedtime will make you live longer, right?
Yeah, definitely.
That's all I need to get out of this.
Oh man, too funny. Well, what have we missed, Adrian? What other big health topics are there? I mean, I feel like you kind of answered all the questions I had for you, but is there anything kind of big out there we should touch on?
I think we covered all of the main ones. I didn't expect to cover, we covered seed oils, organic, fasting, pretty much all the main controversial topics that I get asked about. Yeah, sauna, cold plunge, this is everything.
That's great. So you heard it here first. Make sure you eat your chocolate every day and don't buy organics. Nailed it.
Definitely.
Well, cool. Let's, before we wrap up, I want to plug your podcast, everything you've got going on. How do people find you? All that good stuff.
Yeah. So my podcast is called the Nutrition Science Podcast. You can find that everywhere, Spotify, Apple.
Congrats on your success by that.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. I also have a social media account. It's at Dr. Adrian, Adrian Chavez. And that's where, those are the main two places where I post. So social media, I usually post content almost every day. That's more, it's not as educational because educational content doesn't work on social media. So I try to educate from a sensational point of view sometimes. But if you go to my podcast, that's where you can really find all the information, everything we talked about today. I have a whole episode on pretty much every topic we talked about. That's the way that I structure my podcast is I'll cover one topic per episode typically. And so I just focus in on, for example, carnivore diet. So I'll have a whole episode on what we talked about, just a little bit longer.
And so, a lot more, yeah,
definitely. So I'd recommend checking that out for sure.
That's awesome. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on. For anybody that, is wanting to get their health in order and want to use you as a resource, do you try to funnel a lot of people to the program that you already have that they can learn? Do you want to start working with people directly? I mean, what is your ideal client for them approaching you?
Yeah, definitely. So the program that I have, so I have a course called Nutrition Mastery Blueprint. And that's the main thing that I would recommend if you're trying to learn more. I'm actually launching a program in January. It's going to be focused on metabolic health. And so that's going to be more of a coaching program. I have not announced that yet, but if you follow me on social media, you'll see that information come out over the next week or so. And that would be probably a good place because that's going to be like a coaching program focused on exercise, nutrition, and metabolic health is really like that's the main thing that people are struggling with in the United States right now is we are struggling with a metabolic health crisis. People have poor metabolic health, which is leading to diabetes, high cholesterol, all of those different things. And that's where I really want to focus and help.
That's awesome. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on, sharing all the information, and thank you for everything you're doing just for health in general. You're cutting through a lot of the bullshit, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.